We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to AVRant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H.
Jim. Jim was willing to use a cheap 1-in, 2-out 4K and HDR capable HDMI splitter to split the output from his Xbox One S to send it to his HDMI to his new LG B6 OLED and his older Marantz SR7008, where it would then be sent to his old 1080p BenQ projector. He was not concerned about lossless audio. He just wanted to be able to send the 4K and HDR to his OLED and his 1080p to his projector. They never both be on at the same time, one display or the other. So what splitter and setup would allow for that?
So the first part of this is you wouldn't want to do it exactly that way. You wouldn't want to split the HDMI output, send one to the LG OLED and one to the Marantz. Because anytime you have the Marantz turned on, the Xbox is going to try to handshake with both devices, and it's going to see that Marantz, and it's going to say, hey, the Marantz can only handle 1080p. So best case scenario, it limits itself to 1080p, including to your OLED. Worst case scenario, it gives you a blank screen and says, this device does not support HDCP 2.2, and that's the end of your journey. So what you could do, since he's never going to have the projector turned on at the same time as his OLED, you should be able to split the HDMI output, send one of those HDMI outputs directly to the OLED, send the other HDMI output directly to the BenQ projector. As long as that BenQ projector is completely powered down, it should only try to handshake with the OLED, so that should be okay. And then since he didn't care about lossless audio, you send that via optical out of your Xbox to your Marantz. That's how you would get this set up. And if you go over to Sewell, they have their split deck, 1-in, 2-out, 4K HDCP 2.2 fully compatible splitter for $40, so it's not crazy expensive. But for anyone who wants to keep the lossless audio, this is not a way to do it.
No, it won't do it. Yeah,
it won't work. If you want to keep lossless audio, split an HDMI output that needs 4K with HDR support, and then send one of those outputs to an AV receiver that doesn't have HDCP 2.2, you got to use an HD Fury.
Yeah.
Which is a $250 device, way more expensive, but that will let you do it. So the HD Fury can solve this issue, but it's a much more expensive device.
Right. So Jim doesn't actually use his full surround sound system most of the time. He usually just uses the TV and the TV's built-in speakers. So for the Xbox One S, he'd have a direct HDMI connection, no problem. For his other sources, he didn't want to have to turn on his AV receiver every time he wanted to switch sources. So he left the standby pass-through set to the Blu-ray input on his AV receiver. Then he plugged all of the other HDMI sources into an external HDMI switch. Wow. And the one HDMI output from that external switch fed the Blu-ray input of his Blu-ray of his AV receiver. Could he split the output from his Xbox One S feed? Oh my God, this is really complicated. Could he split output from his Xbox One S feed this external HDMI switch?
No.
No, that's
same thing. That older HDMI switch is not HDCP 2.2 compatible. The Xbox One S is going to see that. Again, best case scenario, it limits it to 1080p. Worst case scenario, it says doesn't support HDCP 2.2. That's the end of the story.
But he doesn't have this problem because he's going HDMI directly to the TV anyways, right? So
well, it's going through the splitter though.
No, I'm saying that the way that you already talked about it, it's going to the projector and to the splitter. I mean, he was trying
to come up with a way of sending HDMI into that AV receiver somehow.
Yeah,
but I'm like, just don't send HDMI into your AV receiver in this scenario. In this scenario, just stick with a separate optical audio connection. That's the solution. But I wanted to mention, I mean, this is he figured out a way to do what he wants to do. I would suggest just get a Harmony remote, set up an activity where, because you can set the standby pass through.
Right.
To be the last active input as opposed to always just being one chosen input. You have the option. You can set it so that it's always one chosen input, or it can be the last active input. So you could set up a Harmony activity where it turns on the AV receiver, selects the source you want, then turns the AV receiver off.
Yeah.
But now that source will be going through as your standby pass-through. That would be my solution rather than messing around with an external HDMI switch.
Yeah, that seems... I mean, it's working, so if it's working, don't mess with it. But
Right.
in the future, if you find out that this thing isn't working and you need to either buy a new switch or something, you could just plug everything into the AV receiver and do what Rob said. The Harmony remote is a I think, a little bit easier solution for a long term. So he says his Marantz SR7008 listed compatible with 4K Ultra HD as one of his features, but Jim is guessing that was before the new copy protection HDR stuff, correct?
Yes, correct.
Oh, it doesn't have HDMI 2.2.
OA, which means it doesn't support HDR10,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have HDCP 2.2 copy protection. So this was the upscaling Blu-ray player. All right, the 4K upscaling Blu-ray player could handle that. But this new stuff, no.
So all the same, is there a way to actually test this? Aside from playing an Ultra HD Blu-ray disc, since he hasn't bought any yet, could Netflix or YouTube from the Xbox One S allow him to test whether 4K HDR content can pass through the SR7008?
Sure, Netflix can.
Yeah, it's because it's not HDMI 2.0A. Right?
Yeah, but I mean, if you wanted to, you could take the HDMI cable from your Xbox One S, plug it into your SR7008.
Yep.
Try to play so you have to get to the highest subscription level of Netflix before you have that. But assuming you go to the highest subscription level, you can play a 4K with. They have some that are in HDR10. They have some that are in Dolby Vision. So select Marco Polo. We know that one has Dolby Vision, right? You could try to play that through. It's not going to work, but you can try it if you want to.
So, but I mean, that it's not going to work because it doesn't have the hardware. I mean, you don't have to test it. It just doesn't have the hardware.
That's fine. Yeah, I don't mind anybody being curious.
Yeah.
Put our what we say to the test. Absolutely. That's the only real confirmation we have, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
So the rabbit hole option, he says, sell the SR7008, replace it with the Denon AVR X3300W or Marantz SR6010. The price can't be too high, so the newer Marantz SR6011 isn't viable. He will not be doing Atmos, so aside from 7 speakers versus 9, the X3300W and the SR6010 seem very comparable in terms of features. He much prefers the looks of the Marantz, though. Finally! The last couple of people who buy receivers like, oh, Marantzes are ugly. I'm like, am I on Crazy Planet? What's going on? The Marantz is sexy. Thank you. Anyways, however, there are features offered. Are there any features offered by the newer X3300W that the older SR6010 cannot match?
There's a couple.
Yep. What are they?
So one is it doesn't do it yet, but supposedly there will be a firmware update for it. The X3300W should be one of the models that gets the ability to pass through a Dolby Vision signal. And since you have an LG OLED that can do Dolby Vision, that might be a nice thing. As far as we've heard, the SR6010 is not going to get that update. The SR6011 will, and the X3300W is part of the same model year, based on the same platform. So it should be getting that Dolby Vision pass-through update.
So these are not the same years. The S6010 is 1 year older.
That's right.
Okay.
The 6010 is 1 year older. The other one is that the X3300W can work with that new Odyssey Mult EQ control app for iOS or Android that lets you manually tailor the target curves to your liking. The SR6010 can't use that new app, although the SR6010 can use the old Odyssey Pro, which is $700. So $20 versus $700 for essentially the same functionality. So the X3300W does have a few things going for it, and it's less expensive. So maybe how often are you looking at your AV receiver, right? Like just sitting there staring at it, admiring its.
If I had a
physical
Marantz,
beauty.
I would put it smack dab in the middle. I stare at that bad boy all the time. I'd make my wife move over and I'd sit next to me. I would not do that. So he says in either case, the X3300W or the SR6010, they all spec all of the HDMI inputs and outputs as being HDMI 2.0A with HDCP 2.2, and both receivers offer 2 HDMI outputs, one which is labeled Zone 2. So back to his original setup, will he be able to plug in all of his sources into this new receiver, then send 4K HDR to his OLED, but 1080p to his BenQ projector? At the same time? He says he doesn't
No,
do it at the
not
same
never,
time, right?
never at the same time.
He should
Never
be
at
able
the same
to.
time.
I don't
It
see why that
should.
should be able to do
It
that.
should work.
I don't see
should.
any reason why it would not work.
Yeah, because you don't even have to activate that second HDMI output.
Yeah.
Right. So the passing everything through to your OLED, that'll definitely work.
No,
So
that's
no
not
question
a
there.
problem at all.
Yeah.
And passing everything to his BenQ should work fine too. The question is there something about the BenQ that will mess up what's going?
Well, it's more like, is there something about the LG OLED?
Yeah.
Because what you essentially want when you turn on the Zone 2 output, because that's the one that's going to be going to your BenQ, is there some way that the primary output is still going to sense that the LG TV is there, even when the LG TV is turned off? It's in
Somebody
standby.
must have this set up with this receiver. Somebody must have two displays.
You know, I'm almost thinking it might be better to attach the primary HDMI output from the receiver to his BenQ, because when the BenQ powers down, it's powered down. It's off.
Yeah, it's off. Mm-hmm.
And then use the Zone 2 HDMI output to feed his OLED, because that one you can activate separately, right? So that way, the AV receiver, when you're using the projector but not the TV, you should be able to make it not sense that the TV is there at all. You just turn Zone 2 off entirely. And then when you're using the TV, you don't have to worry that the projector is somehow going to send a signal that the AV receiver sets. I would try that. Give that a try. Connect the primary HDMI output from the receiver to the projector and the Zone 2 to the TV.
Honestly,
that should work.
I cannot believe that we cannot come up with a way to make this work with just the receiver and getting rid of all that other stuff that you've got. It's got to work.
It's this whole having one that's 1080. Remember with the Chromecast Ultra?
Yeah.
Same problem, stupid stuff. So
Yeah.
honestly, you might still end up with an HD Fury at the end of all of this.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.